In this video, we look at the performances of Thai companies. Our first view comes from our ESG assessments. Across the 25 companies that we look at today, we see quite a tight grouping, with many of the companies achieving scores that sit within the 30 to 49 out of 100 bracket. This is what we classify in our methodology as limited in absolute terms, and suggests that for these companies, whilst they're making ESG disclosures, there's still room for improvement in order to make them more holistic and more informative for their stakeholders. The typical areas of improvement that we would identify would be accompanying reporting on policies with more information about how these policy commitments are being actually upheld by companies, the setting of clear, quantitative, time-bound targets, and also the disclosure of key performance indicators. When we benchmark the performance of Thai companies kind of from an average level against other regions, the outlook is quite favorable. So you can see the average overall ESG score for companies from Thailand is 39 out of 100, ahead of Malaysia at 33, China at 26, and the emerging markets region overall at 31 out of 100. And this is the same when we take this apart and look at those average environmental scores, average social scores, and average governance scores. If we switch to the topic of the energy transition, which is a key concern for many investors, and we look at the level of performance here, we see a very different dynamic. So firstly, towards the top end of the scale, we've got many companies achieving close to or above this 50 out of 100 score, which is what we classify as really robust in absolute terms. But at the same time, you've got a number of companies falling into our weak performance category. So these are companies that have scores of lower than 30 out of 100. And this is typically reflective of companies that are failing to disclose or articulate how they're transitioning their businesses to support a low carbon economy. So compared to that broader lens of ESG that we were just looking at, this specific view on energy transition certainly tells a very different picture. Although again, the average levels of performance for Thai companies, as shown in the bottom of this slide, still continue to outpace those of Malaysia, China, and the emerging markets region. Now, finally, if we look a little bit more closely at some of the leading performers, we can see that they come from the basic resources and extractive sectors, so building materials, chemicals, and energy companies. And that's not an unusual trend. These sectors typically have high social and environmental footprints, and so naturally there's a greater sensitivity of ESG factors and how they need to be managed. Whilst the absolute scores for many of these leading companies are what we consider to be limited in absolute terms, so not really breaching that 50 out of 100 mark, the relative performance shows a positive outlook, I think, for Thai companies. You can see that many of the companies are amongst the top 100 within the emerging markets region that we assess, and many of the companies are within the top 1,000 of the wider universe of companies that we assess from Europe, North America, and the Asia Pacific region. Thank you very much.